Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Tuesday, January 21st, and obviously, we got a national championship to talk about. Ohio State beats Notre Dame 34-23 with a little bit of dramatics at the end that probably were a little bit unnecessary for the Buckeyes, but they get the win nonetheless, and Ryan Day becomes a national title head coach. Definitely a lot of people deleting some tweets about Ryan Day right about now. Then we'll get into a little bit of talk about where they go from now. Obviously, 2025 will be a year of change for both these teams in a lot of different ways. We'll break down what that year should hold for both these teams, and the standard has been set. You're going to have to find your way back to the CFP if you want a successful season. Then we'll get to some superlatives for the entire CFP. The toughest one to pick was the moment of the CFP because of that play that happened yesterday, but I like the pick that I have on that. Then we'll get to an all-CFP team, obviously going to be dominated by the Buckeyes, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And then we'll finish it off. I'll give you my top 10 teams in the last ranking for this year. I'll give you my top 10 teams as I see it as we wrap up the 24-25 season. But going to be a remarkable show. But before we jump in, do want to remind you guys we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $, add any question, comment you'd like. It'll pop up on the screen and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be interactive, so utilize that whenever you can. But let's go ahead and jump in here and let's talk about Ohio State. They won the national championship yesterday, and it was a really good one. It did not look like it was going to be a really good one around halftime, and then Notre Dame decided to do what Notre Dame has done really the entire year and fight their tails off for the entire four quarters. Really gave Ohio State everything they could handle, but it opened very cleanly for Notre Dame in this one. We'll go quarter by quarter, make this a little bit easier to digest, but for Notre Dame, started absolutely picture perfect. 18 plays, 75 yards, and a score, multiple fourth down conversions. The one issue with that was Riley Leonard carried the ball 9 times for 34 yards, went to the sideline after that drive and threw up pretty quickly. So the question started to begin of how healthy is he? Is he going to be able to keep up this pace of 9 carries in a drive and get your team down the field in almost 10 minutes? Is he going to be able to keep that up for the entire game? It was very obvious that he was not going to be able to, but Ohio State returned the favor pretty quickly. They were knocking on the door to start the second quarter, and then Jeremiah Smith takes it in to start the second quarter. The QB run game really was a huge part of this game, really throughout, and early on it definitely showed itself very, very quickly. In the second quarter, this was all Ohio State. This was really when Ohio State kind of won a national title in a lot of different ways, where they scored that on that second play with Jeremiah Smith on an 11-play drive, got a punt from Notre Dame, a big-time holding call, which the first time that's happened since September for Ohio State, so kind of insane that unfolded. But then they went on another 10-play drive, got another score. Quinshon Judkins gets into the end zone, and a lot of people have some questions. Notre Dame gets stuffed. Riley Leonard looks a little bit gimpy, starts to look a little bit like those runs are really kind of taking a toll on him. And then Ohio State goes 12 more plays, goes down and scores with 27 seconds left in the first half. They outgain them 169-3 in the second quarter of this one, and Ohio State takes full control going into halftime of this game. They're up 28-7. Everyone's looking around just wondering if Riley Leonard and this Notre Dame team would have any answer. And overall, in the first half, it was Will Howard. He was not being denied early in this game. In the first half, went 14 for 15, 144 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, added 26 rushing yards, and just looked like a guy on a mission. Was perfect on third down, 6 for 6, made some huge throws, including some huge catches, including one from Brendan Ennis that was absolutely massive. 4.8 yards per rush in this one penalty at halftime. They were playing really, really good football. Now, Notre Dame was playing more than fine, but we're 2-6 on third down, had a couple of penalties, and you give an opening like that to an Ohio State team like this, they're going to take full advantage of that, and they really did in this game. Really remarkable second quarter, and then it made way for a second half that got a little bit crazy, and the third quarter was kind of the start of that. And now Ohio State did open that thing up with a chunk run from Quinshon Judkins for about what looked like 70 yards. I didn't know exactly what the number is, but got up by 24 pretty quickly early on in the second half, got a quick field goal, and this thing looked entirely out of reach. Then Notre Dame started to grind their way back. They got a big-time 34-yard touchdown pass to Jaden Greathouse, who was just incredible in this game and will be someone to watch possibly for the portal, but sounds like he loves Notre Dame. I don't expect him to move, but definitely a lot of teams calling him right about now, I'd have to imagine. But they got that, and they got the two-point conversion to cut it 16. Ohio State starts rolling right back down the field with an R.J. Oben penalty that looked to be an absolutely massive one that could have buried them going into the fourth quarter. And then a lot of stuff happened. Then you did have the fumble by Emeka Egbuka that opened the door for Notre Dame. A great play by Drake Bowen on that one. Ran him down and made an awesome punch on the ball. And then they come right down the field and they settle for a field goal and they miss. And frankly, they got what they deserved on that one. You're down 16 points with about 9 minutes left in the game. You have to go for the touchdown. One way or the other, you're going to have to score 2 touchdowns, and you're not going to have too much time to do it. Now, Notre Dame did get a couple of chances to try to tie this thing, so maybe it wasn't all that crazy at the time, but you look back at it, and there's a lot of different questions of if they go for it, even if they don't get it. They ended up pinning him anyway with the missed field goal, but at the end of the day, even if you don't get it, you're in the same exact position that you were anyway, and you're probably in a position where at the very least you're getting 2 more possessions and you have that shot that you ended up having anyway. You know, Notre Dame continued to hang around, 16 points without 5 minutes left, and then Jaden Greathouse made a really ridiculous play on a touchdown to cut the lead to 10. 2-point conversion from Jeremiah Love made it 8, that was a double reverse pass from Jordan Faison, but really remarkable play from Notre Dame down the stretch of this game. Thing got really, really interesting. People were wondering, can Ohio State close? Is this going to be a massive, massive collapse? And then Jeremiah Smith came into the mix, and they just decided number 4's alone, let's just throw it up to him, and it worked. It was the man coverage that we've talked about really all week. It came back to bite Notre Dame in the worst possible moment, and it really did the entire game. Now, they did a really good job in the second half trying to, at the very least, kind of temper what Ohio State was doing, but overall, did a remarkable, remarkable job throughout this game. Just had that one moment with Ohio State and Jeremiah Smith, and that was going to happen, if I'm being totally honest. Jaden Fielding hits a field goal, this thing ends, and Ohio State becomes the first team to win a 12-team national championship, but remarkable game. It was absolutely incredible to watch these two teams go at it. There was a point in the middle where you're thinking, was that Ohio State-Texas game the real national championship? But then Notre Dame did what they do. They really, really fought back in this one, and you needed one big, massive play, and the best player in the game made it. Jeremiah Smith made the play that they needed, and Will Howard made a number of big-time plays in this game. But let's talk about real quickly how Will Howard and Ohio State got the win here, because there was a lot of great things happening for Ohio State, especially early in this game. But we'll start with the play-calling masterpiece. Chip Kelly and Ryan Day did incredibly well in this game. This is not a good, easy defense to find openings against, even if they're playing man coverage. It is not very easy to find openings against this group, and they were able to. Really, the entire day, were able to run the ball very effectively with different motions and things, and then Will Howard made every single throw you could possibly want him to make. Played some really, really great football, and obviously made the biggest throw when he very much needed it to Jeremiah Love. And then elite O-line play. I mean, they dominated Notre Dame in the trenches in this game in a way that not really anyone had been able to do throughout the CFP. Now, Penn State had plenty of success, but there was definitely this air of, if Notre Dame can slow down that run game, what could possibly happen in this one? And they did not do that by any means. 214 yards, 5.6 yards a clip for Ohio State in this game. Just an elite performance from a group that was all over the place throughout this year. A couple of injuries, a couple of things that really held them down, but they dominated when they very much needed to, especially in this game. Not so much in that Texas game, but plenty in this game, and really dominated the line of scrimmage. Got Ohio State what they needed, which was a run game that could help out Will Howard, who was incredible in this one. 17 for 21, 234, 2 touchdowns, and it really caps a career that, that probably should have gotten a little bit more respect before he went to Ohio State, but at the end of the day, he gets his moment in the sun. He very much deserves it. Did a ton of damage with his legs as well in this game, and was just downright remarkable all the way throughout this season. Had a couple of moments where a lot of other quarterbacks would have shrunk. A lot of other quarterbacks would have, not played their best football down the stretch of the season after the Michigan loss, after the Oregon mistake. A lot of questions would have been had for that kid, but he found a way through. He played his best football throughout these last 4 games, and he moves forward as a national champion and likely with some pretty good NFL draft prospects, which we'll talk about likely next week when we get into all that stuff. But overall, they did it. they actually did the thing. The title or bust team actually did it. They won a national title, and it's a very weird team. It was a very weird road to get here, and we'll talk about it tomorrow in a little bit more detail, just where they stack up in the world of the CFP champions, because one of the more confusing teams, if I'm being totally honest. But when they got going, they were the scariest team. They were the best team in the country. There was no question about that. And a million people questioned Ryan Day. A million people questioned if he was ever going to be able to get to this point. Now, for me, myself, not much changed about the way that I think about Ryan Day after last night. Now, obviously, he is a national champion, so I'll treat him a little bit differently going forward. But overall, he was a great coach before. You know, I said after the Michigan game they probably shouldn't fire him because you're probably not finding a better coach than him, and it's very obvious you're not. This is the second best head coach in the game as far as I'm concerned. I said it going into this one that the winner would be, and Ryan Day is very much in that group. Now, you can make the argument that he's number one, but we'll talk about that tomorrow. We'll get into a little bit more detail about Ryan Day and his remarkable resume that he has thus far that now officially has that crowning achievement on it. But overall, the story of this could be Ryan Day, it could be Will Howard, it could be Jeremiah Smith, but it is the seniors. Let's just be totally honest. This group of guys decided to come back for that moment. They decided to come back. Jack Sawyer, JTT, Emeka Egbuka, Travion Henderson, Cody Simon, who was the defensive MVP last night, all of those guys came back for that moment. They came back for the moment to lift that national championship trophy, and yeah, it probably wasn't the perfect year. It probably wasn't the way that they imagined it in their head, where they lose to Oregon on the road in dramatic fashion. They lose to Michigan for the fourth year in a row and haven't beaten Michigan their entire careers, but they got the ultimate goal. And I think everyone understands that as big as those rivalry games are and as massive as they will be going forward, the national title is what we're playing for at the end of the day, and Ohio State was able to find a way to do it. It's a remarkable year. It's a very confusing year, and it's one that will be much talked about for quite some time to come. It gets the 12-team playoff era off on a very, very interesting foot. Obviously, the 4-team started with an Ohio State champion. The 12-team starts with an Ohio State champion as well. Remarkable game from them, and they deserve all the respect in the world for how they've played throughout the season, especially the last 4 games. But as for Notre Dame, this was not the last time you will see Notre Dame at this level. I can almost promise you that. Now, I don't know what next year will hold. We'll talk about that here in a second. There are some pretty big questions about next year as we'll get into that, but what they've done since that NIU game has been nothing short of remarkable. You know, it's very, very easy to drop another one of those games, whether it was Louisville halfway through the year, or it was USC at the very end of it, or one of these CFP games, but they kept battling. They found a way to win these games, and I expect them to be an Ohio State spot at some point with Marcus Freeman as the head coach. Remarkable job he's done this year, and they came up a little bit short of the goal, but this is a very special team that battled through some things that a lot of teams would not have been able to battle through and made some really, really incredible plays down the stretch of this season. But they come up just short. Ohio State wins the national championship, the first 12-team CFP champion, and they join themselves as the first 4-team CFP champion. But remarkable year from Ryan Day, and now we'll look forward to 2025. We'll talk a little bit about what Notre Dame and Ohio State are looking down in 2025. A lot of people walking out the door, especially on the defensive side of the ball for both these teams, and we'll talk about what that's going to look like right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about Ohio State winning that national title, their ninth as a program. Ryan Day's very first as a head coach, and he finds his way to the very top of that head coaching list. Maybe a touch behind Kirby Smart, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. But remarkable season from Ohio State that was all over the place, but it ends with a national title the way that they would hope. At the very start, the way they hope it would finish is the exact way that it did. But let's get into next year. Let's look forward just a little bit towards 2025 for both these teams, because they're going to be confusing years. There's no doubt about that, but I still think they're in very good position to be maybe right back in this position in 2025. Who knows, but definitely back in the CFP. And we'll start with Notre Dame a little bit, because that might be a little bit one that's an easier one to wrap your head around than Ohio State right about now. But for Notre Dame, it's CJ Carr time. At least it seems that it's CJ Carr time. Now, it could be Steve Angeli. They possibly could go out into the portal. Now, there's still a lot of people talking about Quinn Ewers. I don't think that's going to happen, but obviously that is something that will be talked about until this thing is settled. He is the presumed starter, though. CJ Carr, I love this kid. I think he's going to be absolutely incredible. I think he's going to bring a little bit more of that passing game to them, and they're bringing in some guys to help him out with that. Malachi Fields coming in from Virginia, excuse me. Will Pauling coming in from Wisconsin. The pass game could take a big-time step forward. And also, Jaden Greathouse going into his junior year, going to be a very special player. As long as you lean into him a little bit more aggressively. If you don't, then he could be finding his way out in the portal. But that's something we can talk about in time. Obviously, don't want to speculate too much, but it comes down to CJ Carr. How ready is he to step into a void that is massive? Riley Leonard did things for this team that really cannot be equated just by what happened on the field. He was huge for this group, and CJ Carr's got to step up in a huge way. Now, he does have the backstop that is these two guys. Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price are set to be back in 2025, which sounds insane, but they are both Jeremiah Love only a sophomore, Jadarian Price a redshirt sophomore, so could find his way out, but I would tend to believe he will be back for 2025. Both guys that are just downright incredible, and they can be run first and really find their way to the title kind of a similar way they did this time. Now, CJ Carr is probably not going to be the factor that Riley Leonard was with his legs, but they should be right back in the mix, and these guys should be a huge reason for that. But it was a great year for Notre Dame. There's no doubt about that. They overexceeded my expectations at the very least as we went into this season, but next year will fall all on CJ Carr's shoulders, and we'll see if he's going to be able to handle it. But let's look at that schedule really quickly. Let's see what they're up against, because it's a little bit tougher than some past years, and yes, somehow they only have 11 guys scheduled right now, so we'll see what happens with that. But at the end of the day, start the year at Miami, not going to be an easy one by any means, especially with CJ Carr against Carson Beck, two very different quarterbacks at very different parts of their career, so that'll be an interesting one to watch. A&M, the exact same way, and definitely will be a fascinating one where could get a little bit sketchy for him. If they're not careful, Marcel Reed could be setting for a huge year, and then you have the normal games. You have Purdue, you have Navy, you have USC in there, obviously, but you had a team like Syracuse, who's very dangerous. You had a team like Boise State, who obviously doesn't have Ashton Genty anymore, but will be a very good team in 2025. And then got to go to Arkansas, got to go to Boston College. This is not a murderer's row of a schedule by any means, but this is a fair bit tougher than what they faced this year, and definitely will test them as they head into 2025, because there's a couple of teams on here that could really be big-time problems for them, especially early in the year with those two games. You start the year 0-2, I don't think you have any more leeway. You should be able to lose 2 games and find your way into the CFP, but it's not crazy to think they lose those first 2 games, and then you're looking down a road that has just a number of landmines, whether you're talking about USC or Navy or Boston College or Syracuse. You're going to have a number of moments where you could lose where you probably shouldn't. You definitely don't want to start this thing 0-2, and you very well could. But the questions and how they will kind of define how they do in 2025, who's the quarterback is probably the biggest one, right? Is it CJ Carr? Is it Steve Angeli? Is it going to be another transfer quarterback? We'll probably find that out relatively soon. It'll be interesting to see what happens throughout spring, who takes over that job. If one of them transfers out at the end of spring will be an interesting thing to watch. But overall, it's going to be huge. Whoever it is, the standard has been set, and they better be ready to roll right when the season starts, because you're starting with a Miami team that could very well be in your shoes this time next year. So you're in a position where you have to be very, very ready to roll, and that quarterback, whoever it is, very much needs to be ready to rock, and if he's not, then they could fall into a hole that's just impossible to get out of. And then you're replacing a ton of defensive talent, and not only defensive talent, but a ton of veteran leadership on this team that cannot be overstated how important it was for this team. Riley Mills, Xavier Watts, all of those players, even a guy like Bo Collins being on that team was massive for that group. It kept them intact, it kept them together, and in these moments, like last night, they were able to keep their resolve a lot because of that leadership, a lot because of those guys that stayed in this program and have really built this program up to what it is right now. You lose all those guys pretty much at once. So there's going to be plenty of talent in that defensive room. There's no doubt about that. But there might not be the leadership that you quite had this year because it's really hard to find the leadership that Xavier Watts, Riley Mills, Howard Cross, and all of Jack Kaiser and all those guys give to you. So it'll be interesting to see what they replace. I think the talent level will be more than fine on the defensive side of the ball. I think the leadership could be a question as you move forward and definitely will be something they'll be focusing on in the offseason. And then the tougher schedule. Will it come back to bite them? Obviously, you got 2 games that could get you at the very beginning, and then you just got landmine after landmine. They're going to be up to the challenge talent level, but it's going to be a fight throughout the year, and they're going to have to be ready to roll, because if they're not, then it could get ugly really quickly. But moving forward to Ohio State and what they have in store in 2025, it falls on this kid's shoulders. It falls on Julian Saint's shoulders. The all-in season ended the way you expect. A lot of guys walking out the door, with a lot of guys walking out to the NFL. Obviously, all the guys that came back last year, all the guys that decided to forego the NFL for 1 year are now off on their way. So Jack Sawyer, JTT, Emeka Egbuka, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, all of those guys are out the door. Now, you do return Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith, Caleb Downs, all of these guys on the other side of the ball that are going to be downright remarkable. So you got plenty of talent. It's not going to be an issue. The talent level of this team really ever, if I'm being totally honest. But at the end of the day, there are a number of things they're going to have to replace. I think Carnell Tate's going to be huge for next year, and I think they're going to have to get CJ Donaldson really up to speed very quickly in that running back room. A lot of questions. There's no doubt about that. A lot of turnover, but the talent level is going to be insane, and you might have the best offensive and defensive player in the country, and Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs as you head into 2025. So 2025 was a year that was always going to be defined by the result of this year. You know, you badly want to win that Michigan game in 2025, of course, but at the end of the day, you gave yourself a little bit more leeway. You know, if it didn't end in a title, if it was title or bust and they ended in bust, there would have been a lot of different questions about what this team was going to be in 2025, and there would have been a lot more pressure on a guy like Julian Saint as you head into that thing. But they're looking at the CFP again in 2025, and they got an interesting road to get there. There's no doubt about that. Obviously, start the season with that incredible game against Texas. We'll actually get into the first weekend maybe later this week because downright incredible what we're going to get in August 30th. But at the end of the day, that's going to be one that's going to be talked about a ton. Could be a toss-up, could be between the number 1 and 2 teams in the country as we head into this season. And then you do have a little bit of a lull. Grambling State, Ohio, at Washington is a very sketchy one. I think Minnesota is an interesting one. At Illinois is a team that I think is going to be really, really good next year. And then you got Penn State. You got at Michigan. You got a couple of games. You do avoid Oregon, which is very huge. But overall, you got some tough spots. There's no doubt about that. At Wisconsin's another one to really watch. So you should be back right in this mix next year, but you lose that Texas game, and then you're put in a really interesting spot where you got to beat Illinois, you got to beat Penn State, you got to beat Michigan, and then you got to make sure that you handle business elsewhere. So it's going to be an interesting year. There's no doubt about that. Ohio State has everything in front of them, no doubt, but definitely some big-time hurdles to get over, especially that first week game. But some big-time questions as we head into the offseason. Is Julian Saint ready to go? You know, the talent level is ridiculous. There's no doubt about that. The talent level of this kid is downright incredible, but there's a world where he's facing the number 1 defense in the country in the very first start of his season because that Texas defense returns Colin Simmons, returns Anthony Hill, returns a ton of guys on that defensive line, especially in edge rushing, and he's going to be under attack pretty much from the jump. There's no doubt about that. And you lose Josh Simmons from that tackle room. You lose Donovan Jackson from that offensive line room. So this kid's going to have to be ready to rock. There's no doubt about that. He has elite play calls. He has wide receivers. He's going to have running backs around him. But at the end of the day, if he does not hit his stride in spring, you might see Ohio State dip into the portal during spring. It's going to be a very interesting spring camp for them, but Julian Saint's got to lead the way. There's no doubt about that. If he can't, then you're going to look up at the end of this year and have a ton of, or end of next year, and have a ton of questions about what that quarterback position looks like for them going forward. Then you do have tons of players leaving for the NFL. 10 defensive starters are going out the door. Emeka Egbuka, Josh Simmons, Donovan Jackson, Trey Henderson, and also, obviously, Will Howard are walking out the door and more offensively. So Can they continue to roll? Now, it's not something that Ohio State hasn't dealt with before, but this is obviously a little bit different than a lot of the things they've dealt with before. This is obviously a little bit more aggressive than some of the things they've dealt with before. So overall, there's big time questions about how you're going to replace that talent. There's big time questions about who's going to step up into those roles. Offensively, a little bit less of a big deal. Now that Will Howard to Julian Sayin transition is going to be massive, but the wide receiver group is going to be incredible with Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. Obviously, the running back room with CJ Donaldson I think is going to be awesome. But there's a lot of questions on the defensive side of the ball. There's really talented players, but you're replacing just about every single player that isn't named Caleb Downs. So there's going to be a lot of questions about where they can handle it, if they're going to have the talent level that they need. They should have the talent level they need to get to the CFP. Do they have what they need to possibly follow this up with another title? Because that's very much on the table for what Ohio State is. And then you do have the Michigan conundrum. That's going to be a question all offseason. You weren't going to get rid of that last night. Now, you might have been able to wipe away some of the sting of that loss, obviously, earlier this year, but overall, you got to win that game. Ryan Day will still have this hanging over him as he heads into 2025, and he's got to find a way to win that game in 2025. If he loses for a fifth year in a row, and Michigan might be the team heading off to the CFP and not Ohio State, you're going to have a lot of questions. And a lot of this year will still hold on. There's no doubt about that. Flags fly forever. But the questions about Ryan Day will pop right back up. So that's the reality of that Michigan game. You got to wait for it for the time being. But it's popping right back up in 2025, and you're going to have to be able to handle it. There's no doubt about that. So you have two teams that are heading into 2025 with everything on the table. They could very well be matching up again, for all I know, in Miami at the end of the year for another national championship at the end of 2025. I don't necessarily expect that, but a couple of young quarterbacks really take the reins, and they got to live up to the hype. If these teams are going to find their way back to where they want to be, it's going to be those two quarterbacks, and if they can't step up, then it could be very interesting years. And both those places, a lot of guys rolling out, a lot of guys rolling in, and it's going to be a fascinating thing to watch in 2025 for both those teams. But we'll talk about that obviously in more detail as we get throughout the next couple of weeks, but let's get to some superlatives. Let's get to offensive MVP, defensive MVP of just the entire CFP. A lot of different moments I want to break down for you guys, so we'll do that right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked a little bit about what 2025 could hold for those two national championship teams. A lot of different questions, especially around that quarterback position. Will Julian Sayin and CJ Carr be able to step up in the way that they need, or will there be a little bit of a step back? After some really veteran quarterbacks got them there, could the young guys struggle just a little bit in 2025? But let's get into some superlatives. Let's talk about the CFP overall. There's a lot of different things I want to get to here, and a lot of it will have to do with Ohio State, as you can imagine. But overall, let's get into this, and let's start with the offensive MVP of just the entire thing, and I don't know if you can go anywhere else. Will Howard is very, very easily the offensive MVP as far as I'm concerned. His worst performance in the CFP was near 300 yards and only one INT against Texas. He was very, very good throughout this thing, had 8 touchdowns, only 2 picks throughout, and was one of those guys that we talked about him a little bit early on in the year and talked about, him coming over from Kansas State. People had questions. There's no doubt about that. You bring in Quinshon Judkins, you bring in Caleb Downs, and then you bring in a quarterback that won Kansas State a Big 12 championship, but didn't quite get them to the level that you would like Ohio State to get to. And people had some questions. They wondered, did they use all their money first and they had to find a quarterback at the end? Did they mess up this process? They didn't by any means. It was a guy that did not have a straightforward year, that was a little bit all over the place, that had those bad moments against Oregon, against Michigan, and was able to battle through. And that's really why you got this guy. It wasn't necessarily because of the outright insane ability. It wasn't necessarily because of the, ability to throw the deep ball or the ability to run the ball or anything like that. It was the leadership and the toughness that he had throughout his time at Kansas State, and it showed on the biggest stages. He played his best football that I've ever seen him play in these last 4 games, and when Ohio State needed him the most, he showed up time and time again. He was absolutely remarkable. It was a fantastic finish to what really was an underrated career before this year. There's no doubt about that. He was a guy that probably should have gotten more respect, obviously beat that TCU team that found their way to the title a couple of years ago, but this guy was absolutely remarkable throughout this CFP. He is the offensive MVP, and he's one of those guys that will live on for Ohio State lore forever. There's no doubt about that. He came in and did what they needed him to do, got a national title, and he walks out a champion. An incredible year that caps what was a really incredible career. Defensive MVP was easy as well. It is Jack Sawyer. This is a guy that didn't necessarily explode last night necessarily, but made a number of plays, and made a number of plays throughout this thing. Had 1.5 sacks against Tennessee, had 2 sacks against Oregon, had the big one against Texas, obviously, and this guy's a true freak of nature. There's no doubt about that. And the career overall didn't quite go to plan. He was an Ohio State kid at heart, and he wanted to beat Michigan. There's no doubt about that. He wanted to be the guy that was able to beat Michigan time and again and really take over that rivalry once again. Obviously, he leaves 0-4 against that team, but the reality is he's never going to have to pay for a meal in Columbus ever again. He is a guy that is a national champion, and he'll be able to wear that as a badge of honor the rest of his career. But remarkable player. Really made life just an absolute nightmare for every single offensive tackle that he played. All of the seniors and him came back, but this was the leader of this team. No doubt about that. He was the heartbeat of those seniors. He was the reason that a lot of them came back, including a couple that sounded like they might have been going elsewhere. Sounded like they might have been going to the NFL, and a couple of them might have been going to other teams. And then he found a way to get all those guys back in that room. They found a way to get on that field, and it was a special group. There's no doubt about that. Didn't necessarily hit the stride throughout the year that you wanted them to, but this guy definitely did. He was absolutely remarkable throughout this year. He made himself a little bit of money and became an Ohio State legend for absolutely forever. There's no doubt about that. Remarkable player, and definitely tore up the CFP as you would assume he would going into it. The coach of the CFP is about as easy as can be. You look at Ryan Day, we'll talk about him more tomorrow, but the job he's done after that Michigan game is nothing short of remarkable. It's a group that very easily could have rolled over, very easily could have said, well, we're 0-4 against Michigan, we're playing a Tennessee team that is very like Michigan in a lot of different ways, but they flipped the switch, and they flipped the switch in a way that we had not seen the entirety of the year, and we knew was somewhere in this team. We knew that that level of play was somewhere around, but they never quite got there, and Ryan Day was a huge reason that they did, because he started coaching with anger. I don't know if anyone else noticed this the same way that I did, but this dude was mad the last month or so. There's no doubt. This dude was coaching mad. He was making speeches very mad. He was a guy that was obviously very upset with the way that the season has gone, with the way the last 4 seasons have gone against Michigan and against really everyone else. And you look forward, and now he's a national champion. He did an incredible job throughout the CFP, obviously on the field, but off the field maybe more importantly. Did an incredible job keeping everyone engaged, keeping everyone locked in, and you saw what happens when that entire team is locked in. They're a buzzsaw that just about no one is going to beat. The play caller of the CFP is Chip Kelly. There's no doubt about that. What a job he did with this group. And you come off that Michigan game, if I were to tell you that they were going to tear people to pieces with this offense, you probably would have called me crazy. There's no doubt about that. Because you look forward at what Chip Kelly has been able to do, and it's been insane. It's been a group of guys that you knew was special. You knew that Travion Henderson, that Jeremiah Smith, that Emeka Egbuka, that all of these guys were downright incredible players. But you didn't necessarily know what it looked like when it was all put together, because we hadn't quite seen it. We hadn't quite seen every button get pressed the right way, and it could just be, attack Jeremiah Smith. It could just be throw the ball to Jeremiah Smith over and over and over again, but that was taken away in the Texas game. That was definitely taken away pretty much from the start, where Texas was playing brackets the entirety of the game, and you had to find another way to go about business, and he very much did. The run game didn't necessarily get going in that game either, but they found a way to get the ball to Carnell Tate. They found a way to get to the ball to Emeka Egbuka, and they made enough plays. It wasn't perfect by any means in that game, but outside of that, it was pretty close to perfect. They played some incredible football. He was hired to take the pressure off Ryan Day when it comes to play calling in these big moments, and he did that in a huge way over the last 4 games. Obviously, Ryan Day is still a huge part of this offense and helps with game planning, helps with all that type of stuff, but at the end of the day, this is a guy that really changed what this program was capable of, what this team was capable of throughout this year, and these last 4 games, he's been downright special. There's no doubt about that. He's been the best play caller in the country the last 4 games, and really throughout this year. You do wonder where it was during the Michigan game. There's no doubt about that if you're an Ohio State fan, but at the end of the day, he did dial it up when you very much needed it, and he coached some of the best football that he's coached really throughout his career, and it's been a remarkable career for this guy. The game of the CFP, you have to go all the way back to those quarterfinals when Texas played Arizona State, because there was a lot of really great games. With the semifinals and last night was absolutely incredible, but this was the one. Tons of swings of energy, multiple remarkable performances, including what I tend to consider the performance of the CFP from Cam Scadaboo in that game. And Texas found a way to get it done. In double overtime, Texas led by 14 at halftime, a couple of inopportune mistakes, a couple of coaching mistakes, a couple of missed field goals, and Texas was in a very bad spot. And then they get into overtime, they get a touchdown scored on them. Everyone's questioning if Texas is going to go home. And then the 4th and 13 happens, which could be the play of this entire thing. If Texas were to go on to win the national title, that would be a play that lives on the same way. A play that we'll talk about here in a second is going to live on for Ohio State. But overall, remarkable game that went all the way back and forth. When you talk about what Cam Scadaboo did in that game, he had 2 rushing touchdowns, a passing touchdown, over 300 yards total against a defense that looked like they could not get anything open. Looked like no one was going to find a way to get open. Even Cam Scadaboo early in that game did not look like the player that he looked the entirety of the year. And then something happened at halftime. Something happened when he threw up, really, where he just entirely took over that game. It was a remarkable performance from him, and we got the game of the year in Atlanta as far as I'm concerned. Maybe Ohio State, or maybe Georgia, Bama or Ohio State, Oregon takes the cake just by a little bit, but this was very, very close at the very least, and it put them in a position where Texas moved on to the next round. There's no doubt about that, and they played an Ohio State team that obviously ended up being the just buzzsaw that they ended up being, but at the end of the day, this was the game of the CFP as far as I'm concerned. Obviously, a couple other ones came very close, and hopefully we get a couple more of these as we move forward throughout this 12-team CFP, but overall, remarkable game in Atlanta. Wasn't the national championship like the way we probably wanted it to be, but at the end of the day, was an incredible game, and Texas gets a double overtime win in what was just all over the place throughout that game. The unit of the CFP was the Ohio State D-line, and there were a number of I could have choose from the Ohio State group. I could have chosen these wide receivers who were downright incredible. Could have chosen the offensive line that really dealt with a ton of stuff and played ridiculously good football throughout this thing. And they had nearly 18 sacks in the CFP. They were one of the most disruptive groups in the final 4 games of the year. Every O-line they went up against did not win that battle. There was not a battle they didn't win throughout this thing. Ty Hamilton and Talik Williams in the interior were downright incredible. JTT and Jack Sawyer on the outside just dominated from start to finish. Kenyatta Jackson made a number of plays. It was a ridiculous group. And if you want to include the front 7 in this group, if you want to include the linebackers as well, it was remarkable what this group did, what the pass rush of this group did, and really stifled everything but Riley Leonard's legs early on in this game. And then, obviously, they found a couple openings on the back end, but this defensive line just ate up this group. They ate up the Notre Dame group, they ate up the Texas group, and so on throughout these last couple of games. The Michigan offensive line has to feel pretty good about what they did, and they probably got eaten up pretty good in that game. So, overall, this was a remarkable group from start to finish throughout this year, and these last 4 games, they really carried Ohio State in a lot of different ways. The moment of the CFP, I fought myself on this one a lot because I thought about that Jeremiah Smith catch a ton. I thought about that one being the one. I think this is the one, if I'm being totally honest. I think this is the moment of the CFP, not necessarily because of the moment, not necessarily because of the game or whatever or anything like that. Because of the player, because of the guy that ended up doing it. Jack Sawyer beats Cam Williams clean. He gets to Quinn Ewers, his old roommate, punches it out and runs it back 87 yards. it was a moment that will live on for Ohio State forever. Now, that Jeremiah Smith play will as well, but I think that guy right there, I think Jeremiah Smith has plenty of other plays that will live on in Ohio State history. I think that's the one for Jack Sawyer. I think that's the one that everyone will remember. I think that's the one that a lot of people around Columbus will bring up whenever they see him, and that's the one that will probably be playing on a loop in the Ohio State facility for a very, very long time. This was the heartbeat of this team. This was the guy that gave a ton throughout his career, and it wasn't a perfect career, but this moment was worth everything, I have to imagine. And then obviously moved on, made a number of plays last night, but this feels like the moment in the CFP to me. This feels like the moment where it all became real, where Ohio State fans really felt like we're really going to turn this thing around, from losing to Michigan to winning the national title, and it was the guy that got everyone back in place. It was the guy that got everyone back on this team, and the guy that really put this team in a position to win the national title this year. So to me, that's the moment of the CFP. You could argue the Jeremiah Smith catch, and I would not argue too much with you, but at the end of the day, I think the guy, the moment, and the just energy of that place was just a little bit different when he picked up that ball and went 87 yards to the house. But remarkable CFP. The first time around didn't necessarily go perfectly, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the week, the future of the CFP and how this year kind of educates that decision. But overall, remarkable year and some remarkable performances from some great players. But let's move forward to the all CFP team right after this break. We'll get into all the guys that really stood out in a big time way, all the guys that made number of plays, and obviously it's going to be a lot of Ohio State guys on this, but we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about these CFP superlatives. Gave out the offensive MVP, obviously Will Howard, the defensive MVP, obviously Jack Sawyer, and you move forward to the all-CFP team. I wanted to give out my all-CFP team as I see it. Wanted to give a little bit of love to some different teams out there, but it's going to be a lot of Ohio State. Let's just be totally honest. Those were the guys that really took over this tournament in a lot of ways, and we'll start with the offensive side of the ball, and you'll find that's where Ohio State did a lot of their work. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing. Will Howard's the quarterback. I don't think it needs to be questioned too much. The INT against Texas was the rough moment, and that was just about it for this guy. He totally tore people to pieces, made a number of big-time throws throughout this one, especially that last one. There's no doubt about that. The second he released that ball, you felt like Jeremiah Smith was down there somewhere, and he absolutely was. He made the play of the game, but this was the guy that executed an offense that was really, really hard to execute throughout this year, found a way to get it done on the biggest stage, and just continue to make plays, in big-time moments where it really could have fallen apart, where he could have made one mistake and this entire season falls to pieces for Ohio State. He never did. He always made the right play, and although he had those 2 picks throughout this thing, one of them was relatively inconsequential against Tennessee. The other one, Texas took advantage of, but at the end of the day, they win that game, they keep moving forward, and Will Howard was a huge reason for that, was remarkable throughout this year, but these last 4 games was downright special. The running backs are just the Ohio State running backs, frankly. Now, I could have put Quinshon Allen in here, and I really thought about putting Quinshon Allen or Nick Singleton in here, but couldn't make up my mind on who I wanted to put in, so I just threw in the Ohio State duo. I think these guys were downright incredible. Trayvon Henderson, as far as I'm concerned, maybe made the most impactful play of the CFP when you talk about that run that that catch, that he had against Texas right before halftime. If he doesn't make that play, you're looking at an end of the game scenario where Texas has a 4th down, they kick a field goal to go up 17-14, and then Ohio State's down 3 points with about 2 minutes left in that game. That play totally changed what Ohio State was capable of in that game and really this entire year, and it was made by another guy that found his way back to this team for that national title. Remarkable moment for him, and very well could be the play of the year. Obviously, maybe not the moment and the energy that a lot of the other ones had, but obviously was a play that had a huge impact on what they did. And then Quinshon Judkins was the mean runner throughout this thing. He was absolutely incredible, got a huge amount of big-time catches, big-time runs, and was a mean lead blocker just for fun as well. He was a guy that really kind of set the edge for this Ohio State team. Now, there were plenty of guys that did that, but especially on the offensive side of the ball, the way this guy plays the game gave this team a little bit of that edge that they very much needed. He likes to bark at guys pretty good, and he was going to do it throughout that game last night and really throughout this tournament, but he was downright incredible. Last night might have been his best performance of the CFP, and the other three were downright incredible as well. For the wide receivers, we just got the guys from the national title, really. Jeremiah Smith, there's no doubt about that. He was the best wide receiver throughout this thing. Would have been the offensive MVP if the guy throwing the ball wasn't so incredible as well. But he got hit a little bit in that Texas game, obviously. They did a really good job of slowing him down. But the reality is everyone that tried to just play him man up did not do very well. He's an absolute force of nature. He's the best player in the country as far as I'm concerned going into 2025, and he very much showed that throughout this thing. Jaden Greathouse was downright incredible in the last two games for Notre Dame. He was a guy that really gave Notre Dame a shot last night. You know, if he doesn't make a couple of those plays, this one wraps up pretty quickly. Ohio State wins probably 34-10, and you look forward into what Notre Dame's going to do going forward and if this thing's going to totally implode. But Jaden Greathouse made a couple of big-time plays, was remarkable really throughout this tournament, but especially in that Penn State and Ohio State game, made a number of plays that gave Notre Dame a shot in both those games. Emeka Egbuka, with how good Jeremiah Smith was, a little bit overshadowed this guy, but he was downright special. He was an absolute freak throughout this thing, made big play after big play, especially in that Texas game when they very much needed him. He made a number of plays. Definitely a huge, big-time player, and whoever gets him in the draft is getting a very polished, very good receiver, kind of like a Jackson Smith-Njigba type, who I absolutely love and who's becoming an NFL star before our eyes. The tight end is Tyler Warren. You know, tight ends didn't necessarily have the dominating CFP that I'm sure they would have loved, but Tyler Warren had by far the best performance of a tight end when he played Boise State back in the quarterfinals. He was downright incredible in that game, and he was really incredible throughout this thing. Made a number of big-time blocks in the run game, obviously made a number of catches, and he was the guy that he was really throughout the year. A dominating force that was impossible to stop for a lot of these teams. And then the Ohio State offensive line did just such a good job throughout this thing. They had 5 different starting groups throughout the year. They had 27 different groups overall throughout the year, and they found a way to win the CFP. They were just remarkable throughout the CFP. Had a little bit of trouble with Tennessee and Texas early on with those defensive lines, but overall did plenty in the run game and especially in the pass pro. Did a great job, and obviously this offense took full advantage of that. Moving forward to the interior defensive line, I think you have to start with Ty Hamilton. Was absolutely incredible through this one, dominated pretty much every single offensive line that he faced on the interior. And then Vernon Broughton was a guy that didn't necessarily pop up too much on the stat sheet, but you rewatch those Texas games. This guy was a force. He was an absolute problem for every single offensive lineman that he faced, and he was a huge reason that Texas defense even was able to hold up against Ohio State, because you don't stop that run game, it's very obvious. You don't stop that Ohio State offense, but Vernon Broughton in that front did a great job, and he was just an absolute force all year. Finished it off really, really strong in the CFP. The edge rushing is just the duo that Ohio State has. This is a group, a duo of really, really special guys. JTT went 2 sacks, 1.5 sacks, and a sack last night. He was downright special. Jack Sawyer maybe made the play of the CFP and made a number of other ones. Was remarkable throughout this thing, and this duo of guys has been together for the last 4 years. They've had the biggest moments in the sport the last 4 games, and it's been incredible to watch this duo go at it the last couple of years, and it was a great ending. There's no doubt about that. They dominated that game last night and obviously finished off being national champions. The linebacking group is really fun. Jack Kaiser did an incredible job throughout this tournament. He was a guy that was a downright game changer throughout this thing. Flew around the field, almost had the huge INT against Penn State that might have put that thing away, but really led that front seven in a lot of ways. Made a number of plays in that Georgia game and really made a number of plays last night. A lot of this stuff was kind of out of his hands in some respects and out of a lot of people's hands on that Notre Dame defense, but overall, this guy was a huge leader for this team and did an incredible job throughout this year, was an absolute force throughout the last 4 games. And then Cody Simon, he was the defensive MVP for 2 of these games for Ohio State. He was downright incredible throughout this thing. Frankly, he could have won defensive MVP if Jack Sawyer didn't make that massive play against Texas, but his draft stock has to have climbed incredible amounts throughout these last 4 games. He's a downright leader of this group, and I think he's a guy that's going to get a ton of love at the combine. Incredible athlete, and one of those guys that if you need an interior, you need a middle linebacker, he can be that guy for about 10 years for you if you need. The cornerbacks are an interesting group because these two guys really struggled last night, if I'm being totally honest, or struggled at different moments. Didn't overall struggle, but Christian Gray, he had the big-time play made on him. Jeremiah Smith took advantage of him that one time on that big-time moment, but the reality is this guy was incredible throughout this thing. He made the play that ultimately sent Notre Dame to the national title with the pick against Drew Aller. He made a number of huge plays throughout this tournament, did an incredible job, really since Benjamin Morrison went down, has been an incredible player, but really throughout these last 4 games has played some great football. That last one's going to sting. There's no doubt about that. But he's made play after play throughout this thing and been one of the best defensive players in this tournament. No doubt about that. Jordan Hancock has been incredible. He was a force throughout the CFP. He had a big-time play made on him last night in Jaden Greathouse's 30-yard touchdown. But at the end of the day, he rolled down in coverage so well. He played the run incredibly well, like you see in that picture. And he made a number of plays for this team in a year where all of the other guys were taking all the attention. The guy that was kind of overshadowed, and Jordan Hancock really stole the show in the end of the year. And then Jahdae Barron, this is the leader of this Texas defense all year, and he backed it up in the CFP. Was a huge reason that Jeremiah Smith was slowed down. Obviously, plenty of guys helped out with that, but he was obviously a huge piece of that, and really throughout the 3 games was just impossible to pass to. Really, if you were passing to his side of the field, you were not going to enjoy the result, regardless of if you were Clemson, if you were Arizona State, or if you were Ohio State. You were going to struggle throwing to his side of the field. He did an incredible job throughout those 3 games, and he leaves Texas as one of those guys that wears the number 7, and that's a very special number around that DB group. And then the safeties was about as easy as you could possibly make it. Xavier Watts and Caleb Downs, the 2 best safeties in the country, were the 2 best safeties in the CFP, and Xavier Watts, first of all, just an absolute beast. An INT versus Indiana was all over the place in the other games, especially that Georgia game was just flying around the field, and he made play after play. He was one of the elite back-end players that Notre Dame fans will remember for a very long time. He was a very special player for this program, and it finished off really strong. Although he didn't necessarily get the ultimate goal that he wanted, man, did he play some great football down the stretch and put his team in a great position to possibly win that national title. And then Caleb Downs. What more can you say about this guy? He absolutely flies around the field at a degree that I really have never seen, if I'm being totally honest. The speed that he comes down from in the safety position, and then the way that he makes a tackle, the way that he breaks down and definitely makes pretty much every tackle right in front of him. He was the best player in the country on defense He is the best player in the country on defense going into 2025 as far as I'm concerned, and he was incredible throughout this tournament. But this group was almost impossible to put together. I'll be totally honest with you. You look around the CFP and you had Denai Dennis Sutton do incredible things for Penn State. You had Texas have a number of big-time plays from Matthew Golden and Gunnar Helm throughout that thing. You obviously had Notre Dame make a number of big-time plays in the running game, and Riley Leonard made a number of plays. But at the end of the day, that offense was going to be a lot of Ohio State. That defense was going to be a lot of Ohio State with a little bit of Texas and Notre Dame sprinkled in there. But a remarkable group from this CFP, and I have to imagine next year is going to be just as good, and really overall, the next couple of years are going to be this good because this is a special group of guys, but there's some special group of guys coming through all these teams. So it's going to be awesome to see this thing develop and see which other guys can stamp their name into history next time this year, but going to be incredible to watch this unravel over the next couple of years. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we'll do a little bit of a top 10 Tuesday, do my final rankings for the 2024-25 season. A little bit tough to put together. I have one team in there that might be a little bit surprising, but overall I pretty much like my list, and we'll do it right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down my all CFP team. Very tough group to put together, but frankly, you find whoever plays for Ohio State and you're probably pretty safe putting them in that spot. But remarkable group, and I have to assume it'll be a remarkable group this time next year. But let's get into my top 10 Tuesday. My final rankings for the 2024-25 season was a crazy year, and I have my final rankings here. It's a group that is really hard to put together. After bowl seasons, it's really hard to know how much energy you put into different bowl results, how much energy you put into the regular season compared to the postseason. It was tough to put this group together, but I feel pretty good about the way that I have them ranked right now, and it starts with a little bit of a surprise. Illinois is my number 10 team in the country as we finish off this year. The job that they have done throughout this year has been so incredible. Luke Altmaier comes in, does an incredible job in his second year there. You have Josh McCray, Aiden Lawfrey going into next year that are going to be downright incredible. Tons of talent on that defensive side of the ball. This is a program that's building. It's going to be a really good team next year, and definitely a team that surprised me in a lot of different ways. This year was not a team that I necessarily circled in a lot of ways going into this year, but the group that they had offensively, Luke Altmaier playing the best football that he's played all year, and you go into 2025 with a team that might not come off the page as the coolest or the most interesting team in the world, but they're going to make a lot of big-time plays. And at the end of this year, I think you look back on it, and I very much wonder if Indiana and Illinois played, who would have come out on top on that one. I would have leaned Illinois, if I'm being totally honest with you. But remarkable year from Brett Bielema, and definitely an incredible year from Illinois. They move forward in 2025 with a lot of hype, and definitely a team that I very much like, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. I'll give my early look at that 2025 rankings. Number 9 is Tennessee. Very weird year for Tennessee overall. Never really found that high level that they were able to early on in the season, but were able to beat Bama, got to the CFP, obviously lost to Georgia, had some tough moments, lost to Arkansas, so a little bit of an up and down year. And really, 2025 just comes down to Nico Iamaleava. You know, is he going to be the guy that takes that big-time stride that you probably expected him to take this year, but was a little bit unrealistic at different times for him to be the outright guy on this team? He's going to have to be in 2025. There's no doubt about that. He's going to have to take a big-time step forward. They're going to have to be able to unlock that offense just a little bit more, especially without Dylan Sampson in that backfield. He's going to have to be the guy going into 2025, and the talent is going to be plenty good, but there's a lot of guys to replace, and if number 8, if he can step up to the plate, it could be a special team. If he misses the mark again, then it could be a team that misses out on the CFP and wonders where they're heading with Josh Heupel. Boise State at 8, they absolutely deserve more respect than I think they got after they lost to that to Penn State in the quarterfinals. Ashton Jeanty ran all over people throughout the year, but Maddox Madsen got so much better throughout this year, played some really good football, and then that defense was a very underappreciated group throughout this year. Made some great plays, even against Penn State, where it wasn't the prettiest game by any means. They made a number of big-time plays in that game. This is a team that will be back in the mix in 2025. You are losing the guy. There's no doubt about that. You're losing the guy that was one of, if not the best player in the country this year, but the reality is you're returning a ton. You have the quarterback going into next year, and you should be right back fighting for that CFP G5 spot. Now, the fight might be a little bit tougher next year, and definitely will have a ton of teams in that group, but at the end of the day, this should be a group that is very proud of what they were able to accomplish this year, and definitely a group that deserves to be in the top 10 in the final rankings. Arizona State here at 7. This is a group that never quite got the message that they did not belong in the CFP. They played incredibly good football against Texas, made that Texas defense look pretty average for a large portion of that game, made them look a little bit out of their league in some different moments, but they really played some great football and lost Jordan Tyson late in the year. So you have to wonder what this team would look like with Jordan Tyson on the field. Obviously adds a huge element to that offense, but I have very few doubts that this team's going to be back in 25 and 26 and 27, and really as long as Kenny Dillingham is staying there, because he's a downright special head coach. But especially in 2025, you do have Sam Leavitt coming back, you do have Jordan Tyson, you have Raleek Brown, who is a very talented running back that got injured early in this year, so you have plenty of talent if you're Arizona State. I think they're going to be a really good team in 2025. This year was downright incredible. There's no doubt about that. Won the Big 12 in their very first year after being picked 16th in the conference. They find a way to the quarterfinals, far just short of that Texas team that I actually have it number 6. And this is a great team that I really think could be higher on this list. And if you wanted to put number 3, I would have no problem with that. But the way that I look at it, this team never quite hit that elite level that felt like it was there. It felt like that offense had that next little gear that they possibly could have hit and found a way to win a national title this year, but never quite found that top level. The defense was one of the best in the country. There's no doubt about that. They flew all over the field, made play after play throughout this year, and kept this offense in it in a lot of different ways. But in the big-time games throughout this year, whether it was Georgia twice or it was Ohio State, they missed the mark just a little bit. Now, they made big plays. There's no doubt about that, and was a great team throughout this year, but some of these losses definitely knock them a little bit lower on this list. As you head into 2025, the story is Arch Manning, and we'll talk about that plenty throughout the next little bit, but overall, remarkable team, remarkable year that just never quite hit the level that you obviously wanted it to if you were a Texas fan. Georgia here at 5. Very weird season for Georgia, if we're being totally honest. And you look back, and they still find a way to beat Florida. They still found a way to beat Tennessee, beat Texas twice, and win the SEC at the end of all that. It was an insane year that obviously started with the Alabama loss, with the Kentucky barely win, and you're thinking this team is going to fall off a cliff. They found a way to get it done. You know, it wasn't a perfect year by any means. They obviously lose Carson Beck. Gunnar Stockton plays the last game of the year, and it doesn't go your way. But at the end of the day, you win the SEC in a year where you didn't play your best football by any means. You got to feel pretty good. And as you head into 2025, I think we got a mad Kirby Smart in our hands, if I'm being totally honest. I think we got a guy that is very, very upset with how this year went. As you've seen, he's picked up some wide receivers that are downright special players, especially Zachariah Branch, going to be a special player in that offense, and it could just be a death march in 2025 for this Georgia team. Now, it will come down to Gunnar Stockton and how great he is going to be next year, and a lot of defensive talent that they're going to have to replace, no doubt about that, but it feels like Kirby Smart's on a mission right about now, especially in the portal, and we'll see what 2025 looks like for Georgia, but looks to be a year where they should be right back in the mix and possibly hoisting their 3rd national championship of 5 years. Penn State here at 4. Didn't quite hit the mark that Penn State fans wanted for this year. You know, I do think they wanted that big-time win, whether it was over Ohio State, over Notre Dame, or really anyone in between. But at the end of the day, they found their way to the semifinal of this thing. They found their way to, I believe, 13 wins, if I'm not mistaken, throughout this year. Did an incredible job in this year, and it's one of those things that you miss the mark just by a little bit. Now, a lot of those guys are deciding to run it back for 2025, so you look forward and you feel really good about what you have going into next year, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. A really fun group that I absolutely love, but it comes down to Drew Rattler. He was not the guy that you needed them to be against Notre Dame, not necessarily the guy you needed them to be against Ohio State, so he's got to step up in these big games a little bit more. There's no doubt about that. People will question James Franklin all day. There's no doubt about that, but no one believed in Ryan Day. No one believed in a lot of these coaches before they won their first national title, before they officially broke through. Penn State's building. It's taken a little bit longer than they would like, obviously, but at the end of the day, they're finding their way to the top, and maybe 2025 is the year that they officially break through. Then I have Oregon here at 3. This was a great team. They went 13-1 throughout the year, were the only undefeated team coming out of the regular season. I'm not sure anyone was touching Ohio State on that day. If I'm being totally honest with you, I think it could have been Texas, and although they played incredible football the next week, I think they would have struggled against Ohio State on that day. It was just a remarkable performance from Ohio State, and a lot of different things to figure out for 2025. Now, you do have some guys that are going to be really talented, older guys on this team, like Evan Stewart, that are going to step up big, but Dante Moore is going to have to step up in a big way. You're going to have some defensive players, especially on that back end, that are going to have to step up. I wouldn't be surprised if Dorian Brew, the freshman coming in at corner, was a starter for them in 2025. But they should be right back in the mix in 2025 for the national championship. No doubt about that. That quarterback position is going to be one to watch, and really one to watch for a lot of these teams that we're talking about right now. A lot of them are changing quarterbacks, and it's going to be interesting to see who can rise to the top. Notre Dame here at 2, and frankly, I had them ranked a little bit lower early on in the game last night, and then I bumped them right back up to number 2 late in the game because they're a really tough team. They're an elite run game, and it's a team that is far from perfect. You know, they're not necessarily going to wow you by any means. Now, they did a couple of times last night, to be totally fair, but overall, they did an incredible job. You have a loss in week 2 that would have buried probably 99.9% of the teams in college football. It didn't bury this team. Remarkable resolve from this group, remarkable leadership in this group, and you made the move in the portal at quarterback that you very much needed to. They're going to be back in the mix in 2025. Now, what that looks like, who the quarterback is for that group, That's still very much up for question, and that's something we will unpack over the next little bit. But overall, remarkable season from this group, and although they had the biggest loss of the season, they also had a number of big-time wins when they very much needed them, and maybe were the biggest battlers of this entire year. And then Ohio State number 1. This was the best team in the country, and at their best, they're the best team I've seen since at least 2020 Alabama. You might be able to go back one more year before that, and that's actually something we'll talk about tomorrow. We'll get into where they match up against these other CFP teams, because very hard team to get a beat on. You have the Michigan loss that makes you scratch your head, and then you have these last 4 games that were about as dominant as I've seen just about any team during my lifetime. So it's going to be an interesting group to break down, and definitely an interesting group to talk about in 5 years and 10 years. How they're talked about will be a very interesting thing to watch, but overall, not everything went to plan for this group. Everything went a little bit haywire, especially at the end of the season, and they were able to keep their head about them. They were able to keep their wits about them and play some incredible football. Next year is going to be an interesting one, and we'll talk about it more in time, but for now, Ohio State's national champions. They're at least the kings of college football for 364 days. Maybe they'll be able to extend it in 364 days to another 364 days, but at the end of the day, remarkable team. One of those teams that we'll remember for a long time, and for confusing reasons. There's no doubt about that, and we'll unpack that a little bit more tomorrow, but remarkable year. You know, it's one of those moments every year when you wake up after the national championship, a little bit bittersweet. You know, you have all these incredible moments and cannot feel better for Ryan Day, for Jack Sawyer, for those seniors on that team, for Will Howard, for all of those guys. But it's definitely a moment where you look back and you say, we got to wait another 221 days for college football. So overall, it's one of those moments that's always bittersweet, but incredible year, incredible champion, and one of those years that going to be really weird to talk about as we move forward. But we'll talk about it a little bit more tomorrow, and then we'll move right into 2025 and break down that. I'll give my early rankings for 2025 at the end of tomorrow's show, but that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people covering every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow to talk about Ryan Day, this Ohio State team, and just where they match up with everyone else in the CFP era.